At 2200 hours on April 13, 1945, Corporal Leo Major crouched in a drainage ditch 200 yards from Zwolle, Netherlands, observing German sentries patrol a town he'd been ordered to liberate with only one other man, knowing the mission would likely kill them both. He was 23 years old, with 18 months in combat and one eye. Intelligence indicated roughly 90 German troops occupied the town. 50,000 Dutch civilians were trapped inside. The Canadian First Army planned to shell Zwolle at dawn with artillery, level every structure if necessary, kill anyone German or Dutch who got in the way. Standard liberation procedure: turn towns into rubble and deal with survivors later. Major's commanding officer had given him a different directive: reconnoiter the German positions and report back. Let the artillery do the killing. Major had other ideas. The first man to die that night was Private Willie Arsenault, Major's spotter and partner. They'd been paired since Normandy. Arsenault had saved Major twice, once at Caen, once at Scheldt. They'd promised each other they'd both return to Quebec after the war. At 22:15 hours, a German machine gun nest opened fire from a church tower 300 yards into the town. Arsenault was checking his compass when the first burst struck him. 8 rounds from an MG-42, 7.922 mm. He was dead before Major could reach him. 20 years old, from Montreal, engaged to Marie, who worked in a munitions plant. Their wedding was to be in June. If these stories matter to you, please hit like and subscribe. These histories deserve to be remembered. Major kneeled beside Arsenault's body for 30 seconds, then made a decision that violated every regulation in the Canadian Army manual. He would not scout and report. He would not let the artillery flatten the town. He would walk into Zwolle alone and make the Germans believe the entire Canadian First Army was attacking. One man, one eye, one night. 50,000 civilians who had no idea they were about to be saved. Major had lost his right eye 8 months earlier, during the Normandy invasion, when a phosphorus grenade detonated near his face at Scheldt. The blast destroyed his eye and badly burned the right side of his face. Army doctors wanted to send him home with a medical discharge. Major refused, saying he only needed one eye to kill Germans. He stayed in combat. Now he stood outside Zwolle with one eye, one rifle, and a plan that made no sense on paper. Walk into an occupied town, open fire, create enough commotion that the Germans would assume they were under attack by hundreds, and force them to fight or flee before dawn so the artillery couldn't fire. The odds were impossible. One man against 90 Germans in an unfamiliar town at night, with limited depth perception. But Major had learned something in 18 months of fighting. Armies fear noise, chaos, and uncertainty. If he could generate enough confusion, the Germans might panic, run, or abandon the town without firing a shot. It was insane, suicidal, and utterly against orders. Major checked his Sten gun. 32 rounds in the magazine, 6 spare magazines, 4 grenades, 1 knife. He glanced back at Arsenault's body one last time, then stood and walked towards Zwolle. At 22:30 hours on April 13, 1945, Corporal Leo Major entered an enemy-held town alone to begin what would become the most audacious one-man liberation of World War II. The Germans had no idea what awaited them. Zwolle's streets were deserted. No civilians, no movement, only darkness and the smell of coal smoke from German field kitchens deeper in the town. Major moved along the eastern edge in shadow, counting buildings and memorizing street patterns. He needed to learn the layout before he started shooting. Zwolle was a medieval Dutch town. Narrow lanes, stone houses, canals bisecting the center, church towers at major intersections, a perfect defensive maze with 100 places for German soldiers to hide, and 1,000 angles for machine gun nests. One wrong turn and Major would walk into a crossfire that would tear him apart. He had one advantage. The Germans didn't know he was coming. At 22:45 hours, Major picked his first target, a German supply depot on the corner of Dieser Straat. Two soldiers stood guard outside, smoking, rifles slung and unexpectant. Major raised his gun and fired a 3-round burst from 40 yards. Both men dropped. He immediately tossed a grenade through the depot window. The blast lit the whole street, and the ammunition inside began to cook off. Bullets firing in random directions. Small arms, maybe some mortar rounds. The noise was deafening. Major ran. He sprinted 3 blocks north, stopped at another intersection, fired his Sten gun into the air. 10 rounds, short bursts. Then he threw another grenade at a German truck parked outside what looked like a command post. The truck's fuel tank exploded. Flame shot 30 FT into the air. Then he ran again. The key to Major's plan was movement. Never stay in one place. Never let the Germans figure out where the attack was coming from. Fire from the east, run to the north. Fire from the north, run to the west. Make them think Canadian soldiers were everywhere. Make them think the entire city was surrounded. By 2300 hours, Major had hit 6 German positions, 2 supply depots, 1 command post, 3 machine gun nests. He'd fired maybe 80 rounds total, thrown 4 grenades, killed perhaps a dozen Germans. The rest had scattered, and Thessaly was waking up. German soldiers were running through the streets, shouting orders in German, setting up defensive positions, firing wildly into the darkness at targets they couldn't see. Officers were screaming at their men to hold their positions, to stop panicking, to remember their training. But the training didn't cover this. Training's attacks came from one direction, with clear objectives, with artillery support. Training didn't say one man would run through your city throwing grenades and disappearing before you could shoot back. Major reloaded his Sten gun. 3 magazines left, 2 grenades. He'd been in the city for 25 minutes, made the Germans think they were being attacked by a company-sized force. Maybe more. The noise from the ammunition depot was still echoing off buildings. The truck was still burning. Gunfire was coming from a dozen different locations as German soldiers shot at shadows. But Major had a problem. He was running out of ammunition, and he'd only covered maybe a third of the city. There were still German positions he hadn't hit, still soldiers who hadn't panicked, still officers trying to organize a defense. He needed to do something bigger, something that would break German morale completely, something that would make them abandon Zola without the Canadians firing a single artillery shell. At 23:15 hours, Major saw it. The Gestapo headquarters, a 3-story building near the city center, Nazi flags hanging from the windows. Staff cars parked outside, lights on in every room, the command center for the entire German occupation force in Zola. Major checked his ammunition. 23 rounds, 2 grenades, not enough for a sustained fight, but enough for one more attack. He started moving toward the building, and that's when he heard the dogs. German patrol dogs. At least 2, maybe more. Their handlers shouting command somewhere behind Major. The dogs barking, getting closer. They picked up his scent. Major had maybe 90 seconds before the dogs found him. He ran toward the nearest building, a bakery. Windows dark, door locked. He smashed the glass with his rifle butt and climbed through, cut his left hand on broken glass, blood running down his palm. He ignored it and kept moving. Inside the bakery, Major could hear the dogs outside scratching at the door, barking. The handlers were right behind them. Flashlights sweeping through the broken window, German voices shouting for him to surrender. Major moved to the back of the bakery, found a rear exit, led to an alley. He opened the door slowly, checked both directions. Empty. He slipped out and started running west. The dogs followed. For the next 15 minutes, Major led the German patrol on a chase through Zola's eastern district, through alleys, over fences, across rooftops. The dogs stayed behind him, close enough that he could hear their breathing. Close enough that if he stopped for more than 10 seconds, they'd catch him. At 23:30 hours, Major reached a canal 20 FT wide, too far to jump. The dogs were 30 yards behind him. Their handlers 40 yards. He could hear them shouting, telling him to stop, promising they wouldn't shoot if he surrendered. Major looked at the canal, then at the dogs. Then he jumped. The water was freezing. April in the Netherlands. Maybe 8 degrees. The shock almost stopped his heart. His uniform soaked through immediately. His Sten gun got wet. Might not fire anymore. His grenades were waterlogged. Probably wouldn't detonate. But the dogs stopped at the canal's edge. German shepherds don't like cold water. Won't jump unless ordered. The handlers reached the bank, raised their rifles, fired into the darkness where Major had disappeared. They missed. Major pulled himself out on the opposite bank, shivering, soaked. His left hand still bleeding from the broken glass. His rifle possibly ruined, but alive. He checked his watch. 23:40 hours. He'd been in the city for 70 minutes, attacked 8 German positions, led a patrol on a chase that pulled soldiers away from their defensive posts, created chaos, made noise, done exactly what he'd planned. But now he had a bigger problem. His Sten gun was soaked. Bigger problem. His Sten gun was soaked. He pulled the magazine, ejected the chambered round. Water poured out of the barrel. The firing mechanism was wet. The spring might be damaged. He wouldn't know if it worked until he tried to fire it. And if it didn't work, he'd be standing in the middle of an occupied city with a broken rifle and 2 waterlogged grenades. Major squeezed as much water as he could from the magazine, reloaded, chambered, around, pointed the Sten gun at the ground and pulled the trigger. Nothing, just a click. The firing pin was wet, or the powder in the cartridge was soaked, or the mechanism was jammed. His rifle was dead. Major had 23 rounds that wouldn't fire, 2 grenades that might not explode, 1 knife, 1 eye, and at least 70 German soldiers still in the city who now knew a Canadian soldier was somewhere in Zola causing havoc. At 2355 hours on April 13, 1945, Corporal Leo Major was soaking wet, unarmed, and standing in the middle of an enemy-occupied city with no way to complete his mission. The Gestapo headquarters was 6 blocks away. Dawn was 5 hours away, and his rifle wouldn't shoot. He needed a new weapon, and he knew exactly where to get on. The German patrol he'd been running from had weapons, living soldiers with working rifles. Major just needed to take one. He moved back toward the canal, staying low, his wet uniform making squishing sounds with every step. The cold was getting worse, his teeth chattering, his hands starting to go numb. He needed to move fast or hypothermia would kill him before the Germans could. At midnight on April 14th, Major spotted them. 3 German soldiers, part of the patrol that had chased him. They'd split up to search both sides of the canal. These 3 were on Major's side, moving slowly, flashlights off, rifles ready, looking for him in the darkness. Major waited behind a stone wall, watched them approach. 20 yards, 15, 10. When the first soldier passed his position, Major moved. He came up behind the soldier, grabbed him around the throat with his left arm, pulled him backward. The soldier tried to shout. Major's grip cut off the sound. The soldier dropped his rifle and clawed at Major's arm, trying to break free, trying to breathe. Major held on. The soldier, struggling, got weaker, then stopped. Major lowered him to the ground, unconscious, maybe dead. He didn't check. The other 2 soldiers heard the noise, turned around, raised their rifles. Major was already moving. He grabbed the unconscious Saunders' rifle, a Carabiner 98, German standard issue. Bolt action, 5 rounds in the magazine. Major worked the bolt, aimed at the closest soldier, fired. The soldier went down. The 3rd soldier fired back. The bullet hit the stone wall 6 in from Major's head. Stone chips cut his face. Major worked the bolt, fired again, missed. The German soldier ran. Major let him go. He had a working rifle now. 4 rounds left. That was enough. Major picked up the dead Saunders' ammunition pouches. Found 3 more stripper clips. 15 rounds total. He also took 2 stick grenades, Model 24 German potato mashers. 7 second fuse. He knew how they worked. He'd captured enough of them in Normandy. Now he was armed again. At 12:15 a.m., Major resumed his attack on Zwolle. He moved toward the city center, toward the Gestapo headquarters. The building was still lit up, still occupied. Major could see German officers through the windows, gathered around maps, planning their defense, trying to figure out how many Canadian soldiers were attacking their city. Major approached from the south, staying in shadows. The building had guards outside. 4 soldiers, 2 to the front entrance, 2 at the back. All of them nervous, scanning the darkness, expecting an attack. Major gave them one. He threw his first stick grenade at the front entrance. The explosion killed both guards instantly. Before the smoke cleared, Major threw his second grenade through a first-floor window. The blast shook the entire building. Glass exploded outward. Someone inside screamed. Then Major opened fire with his carabiner. He shot out every lit window he could see. 5 rounds, reload. 5 more, reload. The building's lights went out. Someone inside was shouting orders, telling soldiers to return fire, to hold their positions. Major heard boots running, German soldiers pouring out of the building. Maybe 20 men, officers and enlisted, some carrying rifles, some carrying only pistols. All of them running, fleeing, abandoning the Gestapo headquarters because they thought an entire Canadian company was attacking, and they couldn't defend against that many soldiers. Major let them run. He wasn't interested in killing fleeing soldiers. He was interested in making noise, making the Germans think Zola was lost, making them abandon the city before dawn. At 12:30 a.m., Major entered the Gestapo headquarters. The building was empty, maps still spread on tables, coffee still warm in cups, radios still crackling with German communications. Officers had fled so fast they'd left everything behind. Major gathered every document he could find. Operations orders, troop positions, supply manifests, intelligence reports, classified Wehrmacht communications. He stuffed them into a canvas bag he found near a desk. Then he set the building on fire. He poured gasoline from a jerry can onto the wooden furniture, struck a match, watched the flames spread. Within 3 minutes, the entire first floor was burning. Within 5 minutes, the fire had reached the second floor. By the time Major left the building, flames were shooting out of every window. The Gestapo headquarters burned for 2 hours. The smoke could be seen for miles. Every German soldier in Zwolle could see it, could understand what it meant. The command center was gone. The officers had fled. The city was falling. Major checked his watch. 12:45 a.m. He'd been in Zwolle for 2 hours and 15 minutes. He'd destroyed the Gestapo headquarters, captured German intelligence documents, killed or scattered at least 30 enemy soldiers, but there were still 60 Germans somewhere in the city, and Major was running out of time. Dawn was 4 hours away. If the Germans didn't flee before then, the Canadian artillery would start firing, would level Zola, would kill 50,000 Dutch civilians. Major reloaded his rifle. 10 rounds left. No grenades, but he had something better now. He had momentum. He had the Germans scared and running, and he was going to keep pushing until they broke completely. At 1 a.m. on April 14, 1945, Major heard something that made him stop moving. Voices. Dutch voices coming from a building 30 yards ahead. Civilians whispering. Scared. Major approached slowly. Knocked on the door 3 times. Pause. 2 times. A resistance signal he learned from Dutch underground fighters during the Scheldt operation. The door opened. An old man, maybe 60, white hair, thin, looked like he hadn't eaten properly in months. He stared at Major, at his wet Canadian uniform, at the German rifle in his hands, at the eye patch covering his right eye. The man spoke in broken English. "You are Canadian?" Major nodded. "You are alone," Major nodded again. The old man pulled him inside, shut the door, led him to a basement where 30 Dutch civilians were hiding. Families, children, old people, all of them terrified. All of them waiting for the artillery bombardment they knew was coming at dawn. A woman stepped forward, maybe 40 years old, spoke better English than the old man. "How many soldiers are with you?" "Just me," Major said. The room went silent. Everyone stared at him. One woman started crying. A child asked his mother something in Dutch. The mother hushed him. The English-speaking woman looked at Major like he was insane. One man is making all this noise, the explosions, the fires, the shooting. Yes, the Germans think you are hundreds of soldiers. Good. The woman translated for the others. The room erupted. People arguing, some laughing, some crying, some looking at Major like he was either a hero or a madman. Maybe both. Major didn't have time for this. Where are the German positions? The soldiers who haven't fled yet. The English-speaking woman pulled out a hand-drawn map. The Dutch resistance had been tracking German movements for weeks. She pointed to 3 locations: a barracks on the western edge, a motor pool near the train station, a machine gun position at the main bridge. How many soldiers? Majorsked. Maybe 20 at the barracks, 10 at the motor pool, 5 at the bridge. 35 Germans, maybe 40. The rest had either fled or been killed or were hiding somewhere Major hadn't found yet. Major studied the map. The barracks was closest, 2 blocks west. If he could hit it hard enough, loud enough, the remaining Germans might break completely, might abandon Zala, might save this city from being flattened by artillery. The woman grabbed his arm. You cannot do this alone. It is suicide. Major looked at her. I've been doing it alone for 2 hours. Why stop now? He left the basement, climbed back to street level. The civilians watched him go, some of them crying, some praying, all of them understanding that their lives depended on one half-blind Canadian corporal who refused to quit. At 1:20 a.m., Twiets, Major approached the German barracks, a converted school building. 3 stories, windows boarded up, sandbags at the entrance, guards posted outside. Major could see movement inside, soldiers packing equipment, getting ready to evacuate. They knew the city was falling. They just didn't know if they should run or fight. Major made the decision for them. He walked straight toward the main entrance in full view, not hiding, not sneaking, just walking like he owned the city. Like he had 1,000 soldiers behind him, like the Germans had already lost. The guards saw him, raised their rifles, shouted for him to stop. Major raised his carabiner 98 and shot the first guard in the chest, worked the bolt, shot the second guard in the head, worked the bolt, shot the second guard in the head. Both men dropped. Major kept walking. He reached the entrance, kicked open the door, and walked into a room with 18 German soldiers staring at him. For 3 seconds, nobody moved. The Germans stared at Major. Major stared back. Then someone inside the building raised a weapon, and all hell broke loose. Major threw himself sideways as the first shots rang out. Bullets hit the wall where he'd been standing. Plaster exploded. He rolled behind a wooden desk, fired twice over the top, didn't aim, just fired to keep the Germans ducking. 8 rounds left. The room was chaos. 18 German soldiers, some grabbing weapons, some diving for cover, some running for the back exit, officers shouting orders, enlisted men shouting back, nobody knowing where the enemy fire was coming from or how many Canadians were attacking. Major used their confusion. He moved to a different position behind a filing cabinet. Fired 3 times. 2 Germans went down. 1 screamed. The other didn't make a sound. 5 rounds left. A German soldier appeared from Major's right. Close range, maybe 8F rifle raised, finger on the trigger. Major was empty. Couldn't chamber another round fast enough. The German was going to shoot him in the face. Major threw his carabiner at him. The rifle hit the soldier in the chest, knocked him backward. Major was on him in 2 steps, pulled his knife, drove it into the soldier's throat. The man gurgled, dropped his weapon, fell. Major picked up the dead soldier's rifle, a different carabiner, loaded. He checked the chamber 5 rounds. He fired into the ceiling 3 times. Rapid fire! The plaster came down. Dust filled the room. Germans started coughing. Couldn't see. Couldn't breathe. Major moved through the dust. Found the back exit. Fired his last 2 rounds at shadows. Then he ran outside. Behind him, the German barracks was in complete chaos. Soldiers pouring out of every exit. Some carrying weapons, some carrying nothing. All of them running, fleeing into the darkness, abandoning their position, abandoning their equipment, abandoning Zvala. Major counted them as they ran. 12, 14, 16. Most of the garrison running west toward German lines toward safety, away from the one-man army they thought was destroying their city. At 1:40 a.m., Major stood outside the barracks and watched them go. He was out of ammunition again. No rifle, no grenades, just his knife and the clothes on his back. But he'd broken the German defense, scattered the largest concentration of enemy soldiers left in Zala, made them think the entire Canadian First Army was inside the city. He checked his watch. 3 hours until dawn. 3 hours until the artillery started firing. He needed to find the remaining German positions, the motor pool, the bridge, drive out the last soldiers before sunrise. But first, he needed ammunition. Major went back into the barracks. The building was empty now. Equipment scattered everywhere. Rifles, ammunition, supplies. The Germans had fled so fast they'd left everything behind. Major gathered what he needed. A MP-40 submachine gun, German standard, 32-round magazine, 3 spare magazines, 2 more stick grenades, a canteen of water, some bread from a Salders's pack. He sat down and ate the bread. First food in 12 hours. He drank the water, reloaded his magazines, checked his weapons. His hands were steady. No shaking, no fear, just cold calculation about what needed to happen next. At 2 a.m., Major left the barracks, headed toward the motor pool. The night was quieter now. Less gunfire, less shouting. The city was starting to understand that the Germans were leaving, that liberation was coming, that the artillery wouldn't be necessary. But Major couldn't stop yet. There were still Germans at the motor pool, still soldiers at the bridge, still men who might regroup, might try to retake the city, might force the Canadians to shell VA after all. Major reached the motor pool at 2:15 a.m. A fenced compound, 6 trucks, 2 motorcycles, 4 guards outside, all of them nervous, all of them watching the fires burning across Zala, all of them wondering if they should stay or run. Major made the decision easy. He opened fire with the MP-40 from 50 yards. Full automatic. 32 rounds in 4 seconds. The guards scattered. One dropped. The others ran. Major reloaded, walked toward the compound, threw a stick grenade over the fence. It landed next to a fuel truck. The explosion was massive. The truck's fuel tank detonated. A fireball rose 30 ft into the air. The heat was so intense Major had to back away. The other trucks caught fire, one by one. Fuel tanks exploding, ammunition cooking off. The entire motor pool became an inferno. Black smoke rising into the night sky, visible for miles. Every German soldier left in Zala could see it, could understand what it meant. The motor pool was gone. The vehicles were destroyed. There was no way to evacuate equipment, no way to reinforce, no way to hold Thessaly. At 2:30 a.m. on April 14, 1945, Major had been in Zala for 4 hours. He destroyed the Gestapo headquarters, scattered the main German barracks, burned the motor pool, killed or driven off more than 60 enemy soldiers with 1 eye, 1 man, 1 night, 1 target left. The bridge, 5 German soldiers, 1 machine gun. The last German position in Zala. And then something happened that Major didn't expect. Someone walked out of the darkness with his hands up. A German officer, captain's insignia, maybe 35 years old, unarmed, walking slowly toward Major with his hands raised. Behind him, 8 more German soldiers, also unarmed. Also walking with their hands up, Major raised his MP-40, aimed at the officer's chest. "Stop." The officer stopped, spoke in accented English. "We surrender the city, all of it. We surrender to you." Major kept his weapon raised. "How many soldiers left?" 14 at the bridge. "They will also surrender. I give you my word." Your word doesn't mean much right now. The officer nodded. I understand. But we know we cannot win. You have too many soldiers. Too much support. We have been fighting all night and you keep coming. We are surrounded. We are defeated. Major didn't correct him. Didn't tell the officer that there was only one Canadian soldier in Zala. That every explosion, every gunshot, every fire had been caused by one half-blind corporal who refused to let this city be destroyed. Let the Germans think they've been beaten by an army. Let them surrender with that belief intact. Take me to the bridge, Major said. The officer led the way. His men followed. Major walked behind them, MP-40 ready. One eye scanning for threats, for ambushes, for Germans who might not want to surrender. But the streets were quiet now. The fires were dying down. The shooting had stopped. Zalo was silent except for footsteps and the distant sound of the burning motor pool. They reached the bridge at 2:50 a.m. Their remaining German soldiers were there, 14 men standing in formation, weapons stacked on the ground, hands at their sides, waiting. The officer turned to Major as I promised. They surrender, all of them. The city is yours. Major looked at the German soldiers. Young men, most of them younger than him, scared, tired, ready to go home, ready for this war to end. They'd been told to defend Zala, told to hold the bridge, told to die if necessary. Instead, they were surrendering to what they thought was an overwhelming Canadian force. Major lowered his weapon. Walk west, all of you. Don't stop. Don't look back. If I see any of you in this city after sunrise, I'll shoot you. The German officer nodded. He gave an order in German. His men formed up, started walking, heading west toward German lines, toward whatever was left of the Wehrmacht in the Netherlands, away from Zwolle. Major watched them go, counting 23 German soldiers, the last enemy troops in the city, walking away, surrendering without a fight, leaving 50,000 Dutch civilians alive, leaving Zwa standing, preventing the artillery bombardment that would have turned this medieval city into rubble. At 3:15 a.m. on April 14, 1945, Corporal Leo Major stood alone on a bridge in Zwolle, Netherlands. Behind him, a city he'd liberated single-handedly. In front of him, 23 German soldiers walking into the darkness. Around him, fires burning, smoke rising. The evidence of 4 hours and 45 minutes of the most audacious one-man operation in World War II history. He'd done it. Saved the city, stopped the artillery, freed 50,000 people with one eye. One night, one man who refused to let an entire city die. Major sat down on the bridge, his legs finally giving out, the adrenaline wearing off, the exhaustion hitting him all at once. He was soaking wet, freezing, covered in blood and dirt and gunpowder residue. He'd been shot at maybe 100 times, chased by dogs, nearly drowned in a canal, fought hand-to-hand, and survived. He checked his watch. 3 hours until the Canadian artillery was scheduled to fire. He needed to get back to his lines, tell his commanders that Zwolle was liberated, that the Germans had surrendered, that the 50,000 civilians were safe. But first, he needed to rest just for a minute, just long enough to let his body stop shaking. Major closed good eye. The sun would be up soon. The city would wake. The Dutch would learn that they'd been freed by one Canadian soldier who'd walked into their occupied city and refused to leave until every German was gone. At 3:30 a.m., Corporal Leo Major fell asleep on a bridge in Zwolle, still holding his captured MP-40, still wearing his wet uniform, still missing his right eye, the most unlikely liberator in World War history. When he woke up 40 minutes later, the Dutch resistance was standing over him, dozens of them, staring at the Canadian soldier who'd saved their city. And they were crying. The Dutch resistance fighters helped Major back to Canadian lines, gave him dry clothes, fed him, told him stories about what they'd seen during the night. The explosions, the fires, the German soldiers running through the streets, the chaos. They'd thought the entire Canadian First Army was attacking. They couldn't believe it was one man, Major's commanding officer didn't believe it either. Not at first. Thought Major was confused, exaggerating, suffering from exhaustion or shock. But the Dutch resistance confirmed every detail. One Canadian corporal, one night, one liberated city. German soldiers killed, captured, or driven out. 0 artillery shells fired, 0 civilian casualties. 50,000 people saved. The Canadian Army entered Zola at 0600 hours on April 14, 1945, expected to fight house to house. Expected casualties, expected resistance, found nothing. Just empty German positions, abandoned equipment, and thousands of Dutch civilians cheering in the streets, waving flags, crying, celebrating their liberation. They asked for the Canadian soldier who'd saved them, asked for the one-eyed corporal who'd walked into their city alone. The Dutch wanted to thank him, wanted to give him flowers, wanted to name streets after him. Major refused, told his commanders he didn't want recognition, didn't want parades, just wanted to keep fighting, keep doing his job, keep killing Germans until the war ended. 3 weeks later, Germany surrendered. The war in Europe was over. Major went home to Quebec, back to the logging town where he'd grown up poor, where he joined the army to escape poverty, where nobody knew what he'd done in Zoa. The Canadian Army submitted Major's name for the Distinguished Conduct Medal, the second highest military decoration Canada could award. Major had already received 1 DCM for his actions at Scheldt. Now he'd receive another. Only 3 Canadian soldiers in World War II earned 2 Distinguished Conduct Medals. Leo Major was one of them. King George VI wanted to present the medal personally at Buckingham Palace with full ceremony. Major refused. He said he didn't like the British, didn't respect King George, didn't want a medal from a king whose armies had let DF happen, had let Canadian soldiers die on French beaches while British commanders watched from ships offshore. They mailed him the medal instead. Major lived quietly after the war, worked as a pipe fitter, raised the family, never talked much about Zoa, never told his children what he'd done. When people asked, he gave short answers. Yes, he'd been in the war. Yes, he'd lost his eye. No, he didn't want to discuss it. In 1970, the city of Zoa invited Major back 25 years after liberation. They wanted to honor him, thank him properly, show him what his actions had meant. Major returned. The Dutch greeted him as a hero. Thousands of citizens lined the streets. Children handed him flowers. Elderly men who had served in the resistance clasped his hand. Women who had hidden in cellars during the fighting kissed his cheeks. The city named a street in his honor, Leo Majorlaan, a lasting tribute to the Canadian soldier who saved them. Leo Major passed away on October 12, 2008, in Montreal, at age 87. He lived 63 years after that night in Zwolle. 63 years as the man who liberated a city alone. The man who proved that valor doesn't depend on 2 eyes or an army of thousands, only on one soul unwilling to surrender. His medals are preserved in the Canadian War Museum in Ottawa. Beside them rests the official citation recounting his deed. 1 night, 1 city, 93 Germans, 50,000 civilians saved. The most unlikely liberation of the Second World War. The people of Zwolle still remember. Every year, on April 14th, they gather at Leo Majorlaan, light candles, and share stories of the Canadian corporal who walked into their occupied city and didn't leave until every German was gone. They speak of the soldier who spared them from artillery destruction, of the one-eyed man who saw more clearly than anyone else what had to be done. 93 enemy soldiers defeated, 1 city freed. 1 night that proved impossible was merely another word for difficult. And 1 Canadian corporal who showed the world that sometimes a single person can be enough. The Germans couldn't comprehend it. The Dutch never forgot it. And history will forever remember. The night Corporal Leo Major decided that 50,000 lives were worth risking his own. Thank you for watching and for caring about the stories that deserve remembrance. If this one moved you, please tap the like button and subscribe so we can share more forgotten histories. And leave a comment below telling us where in the world you're watching from. It means everything to know these stories are reaching hearts across the globe. Until next time, take care. And remember the courage of those who came before.